Hey, Chris Baker here. I'm a big fan of the Vidjyagame Apocalypse podcast, and this week, to commemorate the release of the new Metroid game, they posed this question to the community.
What's your favorite Metroidvania? Metroid or Castlevania or otherwise?
And wouldn't you know it, my answer involves Spider-Man. If you're not familiar with the term Metroidvania, or as I prefer to call it, Castoid, these are usually 2D platformers like Metroid and most Castlevania games since Symphony of the Night that place a lot of emphasis on exploration, and often they involve spots that you'll come across and you can't pass them yet because you need to beat a boss that gives you an item that allows you to progress further. A lot of people don't realize that Spider-Man has actually starred in a couple of really solid Metroidvania games, and I'm very honored to have my name in the credits for both of them. But I'm certainly not going to take credit for how great they are, because those accolades should be directed toward a DS developer called Kryptonite. I'm not even sure they're around anymore, but I'm glad they were for these games. And the games I'm talking about are the DS versions of Spider-Man Web of Shadows and Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Of course, both of these were very much overshadowed by console versions of these games, which are completely different in pretty much every way except for the general setup. Like the console version, Web of Shadows centers around Venom and a big symbiote invasion, but the similarities pretty much end there. In classic Metroidvania form, it's a 2D game with a lot of exploration, and there's a bunch of parts where Ichor is what it's called in the game, symbiote Ichor. Yeah, the symbiote Ichor gets in your way and you can't progress until you defeat a symbiote boss. Then you'll get a new power, and that part of the map that you couldn't quite get to before, it's now accessible. You might remember in the console game you're meeting up with all these other characters like Kingpin, Moon Knight, Luke Cage, and you're also making a lot of decisions that will decide if you're a good Spider-Man or a bad Spider-Man by the end of the game. Not much of that going on here. You can switch between the black suit and the regular suit, but other than that, you've got a pretty small cast, but the cast is pretty interesting. It has Black Cat, who's in the console game, but it's also got Green Goblin, looking like he does in traditional comics, which is actually pretty rare. You normally see him in movie or Ultimate form. And you also got Nightcrawler. I don't know why, but they wanted Nightcrawler, so they have Nightcrawler. Of course, Venom is the final boss, and there are a bunch of smaller bosses that are just kind of generic symbiote bosses. In retrospect, I would have gone back and suggested that they be the characters from Separation Anxiety and Venom Lethal Protector, because at least that has a little bit of kind of Marvel lore behind it that really isn't there otherwise. But yeah, it still works. So a couple years later, Kryptonite got to go at it again with Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. And if you know the console game, you know that it's all about these different Spider-Men from different dimensions coming together to stop Mysterio, who's causing all kinds of problems. Due to the scope of the game, they had to completely cut out the Ultimate Universe, so we're only dealing with the Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Man 2099 in this game. But they did something really cool in that every character has a completely unique way of progressing through levels. For example, Spider-Man 2099 is the only one of the characters who could glide through his levels, just like he does in the comics. Another thing this game did that the console versions did as well was to create new versions of classic villains for the alternate dimensions. And they got pretty obscure here with Boomerang Noir, Callisto Noir, who could summon zombies, that was pretty cool, and Silvermane 2099. If you know anything about Silvermane, he's basically a cyborg, so this is actually the same character who has survived until 2099, which was a pretty cool idea, I thought, especially just for a DS game. One thing about Web of Shadows and Shattered Dimensions that I think is particularly great that Kryptonite just killed it with was combat. This is some of the most fun, fluid combat I've ever played in Spider-Man games. I'm not kidding. On the other hand, there was a really big knock against both of the games, and that was that they're really short. I think you can beat them both in like 3 to 5 hours. But hey, it's 2017 now, and these games are really cheap. If you're a big Spidey fan and you really like the Metroidvania formula, you've really got to play these. They're only like $10 now. There's really no excuse. Once you're playing Metroid, I guess. Thanks for checking this out, everybody. If you like what you saw, go ahead and subscribe. And if you use these Amazon links to buy the game, you'll actually be helping to support this channel too. See you next time.